What's up, guys? Welcome to this edition of a Funko Podcast. I am DK Wrestler, and today we don't have MD Shady here on the podcast, and we don't have Robbie D, but we do have some great special guest co-hosts here for a Funko Podcast today. We got ourselves K-Dog and Fish from, of course, the retail pop store of K-Dog and Fish. Welcome.
Boom. Hey-o. Thank you guys so much for having us. Appreciate it.
And you guys were already on here previously as guests, but you guys are co-hosts this time to help me out with today's podcast, which this podcast more specifically titled is I Am Iron Man, the MCU movie podcast, two-part MCU podcast, actually, considering that today's podcast you are currently listening to will be the first part where we discuss about the first 15 films of the MCU. Next week's podcast will be the last 15 films, which will lead up to the release of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania that releases, I believe it's February 17th. So I guess we'll kick off talking about how you guys got into MCU movies. Like what was it that got you guys in the MCU and just so invested in it?
Right away, it was Iron Man. It was 2008. I distinctly remember everyone on the planet saying, you have to see Iron Man. They did such a good job with it.
And we weren't believers.
We were doubters only because of the casting, which I've completely done a 180 on.
Yeah.
And it's actually my favorite MCU character was Robert Downey Jr. being cast as Iron Man. Yeah. And it's being directed by Jon Favreau, who did Elf. And the actor. And we're like,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I remember we were so late to see it too. Yeah. We actually went to see it in Aurelia, and we were the only one. Like, it was only us and another.
It was months.
Another dude in the theater. Nobody else was in the theater. I remember that. So, yeah.
We were late to the party, and then absolutely blown away. I mean, it is to this date, outside of maybe Avengers Endgame and Infinity War, the first Iron Man's my favorite Marvel MCU film. They did such a good job, and Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark. He is Iron Man, and absolutely, if it wasn't done that way, you imagine, because the original rumors, I don't know if you know this, DK, is Tom Cruise was signed to play Iron Man.
Okay.
I
think I did hear that.
That did not happen. Now, if that had happened, would the MCU be what it is today? I don't think it would.
Well, Tom Cruise would be dead because he didn't insist on flying. The suit has to work, and I'm going to go into space in the suit.
You can't stop me.
Can't stop me. I'm Tom Cruise.
You know that we could CGI that.
No. Strap me in.
No, let's do it.
No, light that rocket and shoot me into space.
Those propulsions work, right?
Yeah.
All right.
How are we going to film that? You figure that out.
That's a you job.
I got to fill these canisters full of gasoline.
Definitely Iron Man that got us in, and then I was completely hooked and made sure I saw every single Marvel movie that came out. I became an instant super fan. I was always more Marvel than DC when it came to my movies and comics, maybe with the exception of some of the really dark stuff, because if you really take a look at it, Iron Man came out the exact same year that Batman Dark Knight came out. And that had taken the world by storm. It did $1 billion in the box office. And it was a huge hit. And then the MCU came out of nowhere and just started to slowly build that slow burn of putting all the individual pieces together with amazing casting, amazing films, culminating into the first Avengers film. And you're like, I'm never going back. This is my new home now.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll get right into it with each of the MCU films we're going to be discussing about today, with the very first one, as you guys were just mentioning about, is Iron Man. Released May 2nd, 2008 on a budget of $140 million and the box office of $585.8 million. And I believe that is the worldwide gross, because all the information is provided by Wikipedia. And with these podcasts, we like to discuss the Rotten Tomato rankings, both the critics and the audience scores. So for Iron Man, the tomato ranking being the critic score was 94% and the audience score was 91%. So I guess overall, I remember watching this the first time. I'm like, okay, this is good. And then I rewatched it recently. And I'm like, this is actually a great movie. There's lots of badass moments. I feel like it's got to be easily in like the top 10 MCU films of all time for like anyone's list. I don't know anyone who has voted this movie like lower than a top 10.
It doesn't surprise me that it was a hit with audiences. I'm actually shocked that the critic score was that high. But if they're giving it a fair shake and they're giving Robert Downey Jr. that due, respect of like trying to prove himself again, and it revolutionized his career and his life. Like he was in such a bad place, and Jon Favreau fought for him. They gave him that chance, and it turned his life around that was going in a very negative direction. So I couldn't even imagine what might be going on with Robert Downey Jr. at this point. He might have been a lost cause in one of those, sad Hollywood stories, but he turned it into something extremely positive and absolutely killed it.
Yeah. I think he put some shekels in his pocket too.
Yeah, he did.
I think he's done okay.
He actually, because they weren't believing in him very much, that his salary for the first one is extremely low. But after the success and the plan of the multiple film arc on this character, he secured that where you don't have to pay me. I will take gross. Yeah. I'll take points on the box office. And that's where he absolutely cleaned up. By the time Avengers was rolling around, he was making tens of millions of dollars on. At this point, it's hundreds of millions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we are obviously a Funko related podcast, there are only 2 pops actually made for this movie, which is very surprising. That being the Iron Man Mark I suit from San Diego Comic-Con 2018 and the Stan Lee cameo from San Diego Comic-Con 2 years later, which are some pretty sweet pops, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. 100%. Yeah.
It's actually surprising, I guess, because of the time, right? At 2008, I bet you any money we would see more pops from this film on an anniversary. Actually, it's the 15-year anniversary this year.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll do something for that.
15-year anniversary of this film, which would also mean it's the 15-year anniversary of the MCU overall. So we've seen the 10-year set, which is where this Iron Man Mark I suit came from. So we could see a 15-year set with possibly more pops for this movie, which I think there's definitely room for more pops for this movie.
Oh, for sure.
So the next film, I always forget that this is actually an MCU film. I just thought it was a normal Marvel movie. It's The Incredible Hulk, released June 13th, 2008, budget of $137.5 to $150 million, with the box office at $264.8 million. Tomato ranking 67% and the audience score of 69%. You know what? It wasn't entirely a bad movie, but it wasn't a great movie either, especially when you rank all the MCU films. It had some cool scenes. One that stands out is the Stan Lee cameo scene where basically there's like a phone call. It's like, hey, this old guy got a kick out of one of your drinks because Hulk's blood ended up dripping in one of the drinks, and so happens Stan Lee, of all people, gets that bottle. Yeah. So I thought that was a pretty funny scene. Would I watch it again? Maybe. But it's like definitely not on the top of my bucket list.
I actually think the best thing from that movie is Tim Roth's Abomination, which they brought back into the MCU with the She-Hulk series. Yeah. But it just, Ed Norton, Mark Ruffalo is a much better Bruce Banner. I didn't mind, like, you can't say that Ed Norton made a good Hulk because it's all CGI. So the thing to me is, who's the better Bruce Banner? And if you look at the old TV show with Bill Bixby, that your better representation of what we know from the comics and the 70s show, Mark Ruffalo has a better Bixby Banner vibe. Gotcha. And he's got a great sense of humor. Ed Norton is a great actor. I don't think he makes a good Bruce Banner. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I hated that movie.
It's not good.
It's not good.
Oh, and a tie to where we are. They shot a lot of that film in Gravenhurst, Ontario, about 10 minutes away from us.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are no Funko Pops for this movie, which I'm not surprised that there aren't Funko Pops for this movie. Especially, 2008, Pops weren't even invented yet until 2010. So I guess that makes a little bit more sense. I guess we'll move on to the next movie. It's Iron Man 2, May 7th, 2010, on a budget of $170 to $200 million. Box office at $629.9 million. Both the tomato and audience score rankings were 91%. Wasn't a bad sequel. Obviously, it's not as great as Iron Man, of course. Not even number 3 is better than Iron Man, which I'll get into when we get to number 3, whether I like 2 or 3 better, because that is a big debate.
We've had that debate before. Yeah, we've definitely had that.
But it is better than I remembered, and we do get the introduction of Natasha Romanoff, or Black Widow, so I guess that was pretty sweet. So overall, it wasn't a bad movie.
Yeah, I love Iron Man 2, and we can definitely talk about that when we get to Iron Man 3. You just knew that this was taking the franchise like to a different level. I'm actually shocked that they squeezed that one in before Captain America First Avenger, but it was a great sequel and they had to capitalize on the success of the first film, so I get it. And I was going to mention that if you hadn't, so thank you. It is the introduction of Black Widow. She is undercover being Tony's assistant. And we get an introduction to her character, and so she was very early on as far as like expanding the MCU, because that first Hulk movie, there's very little characters that are reintroduced later. It's really Iron Man, Iron Man 2, and then Captain America. We start getting more of the sneak into the future characters for the MCU.
All right. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the casting too was great.
Yeah.
Now we see Don Cheadle as Rhodes for the first time.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about
that.
We didn't talk about that.
That's true. It's an actor change for
an actor change there. And
that was because Terrence Howard is an idiot. I will say this right now. I hope he listens to your podcast. Terrence Howard is a moron. Terrence Howard is a talented man, but you come in demanding more money and you haven't, like, we're talking one movie, dude. Like, wait your turn. And then if he had done the second movie and then see the success and asked for a bit of a pay increase, I think they would have given it to him. But the fact that he was so egotistical about his role, and they hadn't even introduced War Machine yet. You're coming out of the gate demanding more money. They were like, bye.
I didn't think his role was big enough to demand more money.
Not in one. Not in Iron Man 1.
In Iron Man 1, his role was small, so you can't really demand more money, but whatever.
So then Don Cheadle gets the long game of that character and turning into War Machine and being around for all the movies. Terrence Howard, if he had stuck to it, would have gotten all that money, right? Instead of just paying me a huge increase on Iron Man 2. Anyway.
Anyhow. Best part of that movie, Sam Rockwell.
Sam Rockwell. He was great.
He was so good.
He was really good in number 2.
Yeah.
As terms to pops, there's only 2 for this movie also that I could research. It is the moments involving Whiplash and Iron Man for the Marvel Collector's Corps, I believe. That was the exclusive. And then I believe this pop you guys had at your store at one point, the Iron Man on Gantry Deluxe. That was pretty
we still have those. Yeah. And that's a glow.
I never took that one of those home.
We have a couple left.
All right.
It's cool out of box. Don't leave it in box.
Oh, it's going.
You gotta need out of box for that one with all the gantry parts.
All right. So the next movie is Thor, May 6, 2011, on a budget of $150 million, box office of $449.3 million, tomato ranking 77%, audience score 76%. I don't think it was entirely a bad origin movie. I thought it was pretty good overall, with moments like Thor anytime he was on Earth. And then you have like the diner scene and he smashes the coffee cup on the ground.
That's my favorite scene.
That was pretty sweet. I think it's definitely like one of those movies you could rewatch again. It's not like a cringy one like Incredible Hulk or some movies that we'll talk about either later in this pod or in part 2. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good.
I didn't mind the first Thor. It's not a great movie, but like you said, it's a good origin. That's also our first glimpse at Hawkeye, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and that is true.
So Agent Coulson. So it was, again, expanding a bit. Getting Fury, who was in a bonus credit scene earlier in one of the, I can't remember, it was Iron Man 2. So then, anyway, we're getting more characters. The first Thor is decent. In my opinion, the best Thor is Ragnarok. The second one is absolutely my bottom pile of MCU films. Thor 2 Dark World is a steaming pile of dumpster garbage fire.
It is pretty bad. But we'll get to that one.
We'll get to that
one. Yeah. I don't have too many comments on the first Thor. It was a good movie.
It's okay.
It was a good movie.
It's okay.
That's it. I could watch it again.
I will say this: Chris Hemsworth is the best casting for Thor. Like by a mile. There's nobody else, with maybe the exception of one of the Skarsgårds from the True Blood, the tall one. Maybe, but he wasn't. I just love that Chris Hemsworth wasn't really a movie star yet.
Well, that's the casting of Marvel, right?
Great casting. He bulked up for the role, but he's tall, he's handsome, had the hair.
Yeah.
It was a winner, like Chris Hemsworth. And then later when he gets to be funny,
yeah,
he absolutely destroys the role. Like he's so good at it.
Yeah. But that's what Marvel does the best. Marvel casts the best. They don't take major movie stars and try to jam them into superhero roles because they're not going to work. Like Black Adam was a pure example. Nobody believed Black Adam. It was just, it's The Rock. Right? You know what I mean? Meanwhile, Chris Hemsworth wasn't a star. Chris Evans wasn't a star. Like,
they really introduced, even Jeremy Renner was not a huge
Jeremy Renner wasn't a huge star, you know, like, again, they're not picking massive movie stars and trying to turn him into a superhero, like with Ben Affleck. They're trying to DC does that. That's what DC does, right? Yeah. Marvel does the best job casting. That's my opinion.
You're building off of what the character should be like in really good casting with somebody who fits the role, and then turning them into huge stars from that, but casting really well.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
There you go.
When it comes to Funko Pops, there once again is only 2, and I believe it's actually the first 2 Marvel Pops overall. Like even if you look on the boxes for Thor and Loki, it's Pop 1 and 2 for the Marvel lineup. So this movie introduced Marvel Funko Pops, so I guess that's a bit of a highlight right there. So the next movie is Captain America: The First Avenger, July 22nd, 2011, on a budget of $140 million, box office of $370.6 million, tomato ranking 80%, audience score 75%. I kind of flip-flop back and forth on whether I like this movie or Iron Man as like my favorite like origin film, just because I like the storyline involved with Captain America First Avenger, where it's basically based off of real life events of World War II. You even have the little storyline in there with Peggy and Steve Rogers at one point. I think overall is just a pretty decent movie. But I mean, yeah, like when you think of overall movie and especially the moments, I think, like Iron Man, that's why I keep flip-flopping back and forth. But like, I still have a soft spot for this movie.
I love this movie.
Yeah, so do I. I love every Captain America movie, you know? So, yeah.
I would say other than Iron Man, Captain America is my close second as far as favorite MCU characters. And his origin film was fantastic. I know a lot of people like Winter Soldier better. Then I don't consider, and we'll get there, I don't consider the third Captain America movie to be a Captain America movie. I don't believe Civil War is an ensemble film. It's
an Avengers movie.
It's an Avengers movie.
Yeah.
Before... it's not Captain America 3 is not a Captain America movie. It's really not. But anyway, I digress. I really love the origin story. They did it really well. The deep fake on Chris Evans' body pre Super Soldier Serum.
Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah.
Like they did such a good job with that. The way that he doesn't stand up to bullies and he carries that through his whole life after becoming Captain America. I love the World War II aspect. It is beyond a great movie. I am actually shocked at the scores you just gave. I thought they'd be higher.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And then as terms to Funko Pops, there's quite a bit of Funko Pops for this movie, but 2 highlights that I put down are the Captain America and Red Skull moments that they did for the MCU 10 years lineup, and then the Emerald City Comic-Con Captain America, where he's got like the army outfit and he saves Bucky. So I enjoyed those. I can't think of any other ones off the top of my head, but I know they've done more than the previous movies.
There's a few, very OG Captain America pops, but I agree with you that Emerald City Comic-Con in the fatigues and the helmet
that's awesome.
Is a wicked pop.
Yeah.
Next movie is the first Avengers movie, released May 4th, 2012, on a budget of between $220 and $225 million, with the box office of $1.519 billion, making it the first billion-dollar MCU movie. Both the tomato and audience score rankings are 91%. Great movie, and I think, as I think about it, it is my favorite MCU movie. There's something about it where it's just like that very first Avengers movie. It sets up everything. I mean, we'll get to in part 2 of Infinity War and Endgame, but there's just something about this that's just like the scenes are just so great involved, especially I guess I'll mention that when it comes to the Funko Pops, when you get like the Hulk smashing Loki around near the end. That was so funny.
Unique.
There's nothing really bad I can say about this first Avengers movie, which is I guess why I
job.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%.
They amalgamated all the characters equally. They all had their part. They all served a purpose.
Mhm.
It was funny. It was exciting. It had Loki was a great villain.
Mhm.
You get glimpses into what will be part of Thanos' army. It just everyone like the iconic, and they did that as well for Funko Pop, the circle moment where the camera circles around all of them back to back, that Avengers Assemble moment. That is like, you get chills watching that kind of stuff where it's just that cool. Absolutely love the first Avengers movie. I think that Avengers Infinity War and Endgame have a little bit more heart to them and a little bit more darker edge.
Right, sure.
For me, it's, those movies are a bit higher than this one, but you can't say that Joss Whedon directed it. He didn't do a bad job. I think the first Avengers movie is a banger, and it's insanely good.
Yeah, it's in my top 5 for sure. I'm not sure where it sits exactly, but it's definitely in my top 5.
I listed down as terms to pops. First one you mentioned was the Avengers Assemble set, which is a really sweet build-a-scene set, especially just the Iron Man alone. Like, that just killed it. And then there's even the OG set, which I think had all the Avengers besides Hawkeye. I think Hawkeye was replaced with Nick Fury, if I'm not mistaken. I remember there being Nick Fury. And then there's the Shawarma set. That's just an end credit scene, which I'm surprised they made that into a pop. But
that's a lot of pops like that. I don't know if that needs to be done.
They could have done more from that movie. Even like some of like the alien creatures that you see in the sky.
The Shawarma set was kind of dumb.
We actually didn't.
We never
purchase
any of
them.
them.
No, we didn't purchase them as a retailer or personal collections. We just skipped the Shawarma set.
Next film is Iron Man 3, May 3rd, 2013, on a budget of $200 million and the box office of $1.215 billion. Tomato ranking 79%, audience score 78%. And this is where the argument comes in with, do I like Iron Man 2 or Iron Man 3 better? I think they both have their pros and cons. And I after rewatching these movies, I seen the argument, especially the arguments made on like 4:00 Friday on your live stream and all that, of which one's better. I see why people would say Iron Man 2 because of the action scenes involved. Like, I think they had some awesome action scenes, like even the Whiplash scene that was made into a pop was awesome. I can see why people like Iron Man 3 because of the storyline aspect and how it takes place literally after Avengers. And it's all about Tony's mental mindset there of like the traumatic events involved with what happened in Avengers. And it's just based off of that. So you do have a bit of like heart into this storyline, which is why I think people would like 3 better. But I think like I can easily flip-flop back and forth. There's not really like one's truly better than the other.
I was pissed about the Ben Kingsley role. That's what made me mad about it. The other thing, which I think you've mentioned to me before, there were too many suits.
Too many suits. The suits on the ship at the end, and
it's too many. There was like 40 suits. I love when he does a new suit, like, hey, this is an upgrade. Or, it just, I found that Iron Man 3 end scene, it was, how would you control that many suits at one time? Like, I don't want to say it's unbelievable because we're talking about fantasy here, but
it's based on a true story.
I thought it was too much. And then the Ben Kingsley is the Mandarin and it being just an actor.
The role.
I didn't like that.
You had Ben Kingsley. You could have done it so much better.
Or keep him as the Mandarin. Like, I know it was the guy from Memento, right? Guy Pearce. Thank you. I forgot his name. Guy Pearce was a decent villain, but the fact that the Mandarin in this crazy, dark, murderous Ben Kingsley role, I was like, oh, Ben Kingsley? Oscar winner Ben Kingsley. And then he was just an actor. And then that little... It was a bad plot line. I didn't like that.
I'm not an Iron Man 3 fan. Everybody knows that.
I would say Iron Man 2 over Iron Man 3 for me. Also, Iron Man 2 had that kid. That too. And then that kid shows up as a cameo at Tony's funeral.
Right.
Like, I lost it. I'm like, I knew exactly what they were doing with that. For me, it's Iron Man 2.
Yeah, me too.
When it comes to Funko Pops, there were 4 made for this set. There's an Iron Man, an Iron Patriot, a Deep Spacesuit, and War Machine, which glad that we ended up getting like remolds of pretty much all of them later on, because I believe they remade Iron Patriot for the Endgame set, if I'm not mistaken. That was a Funko Shop exclusive. And then War Machine had a bunch of remakes, especially one coming up for a movie that we will discuss about in this part of the podcast.
We actually have the Iron Patriot 2013 right over there.
Yeah.
Grail, San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah.
All right, next movie. Oh, here we go. Thor: The Dark World, November 8th, 2013, on a budget of $150 to $170 million, box office of $644.8 million, tomato ranking 66%, audience score 78, and I guess I'll just mention right away if I like the critics or the audience, it's got to be the critics score. I don't really believe that 78 would be what the audience thinks. I've heard nothing but bad things about. I mean, I rewatched it and it was a rough 2 hours and however many minutes this movie was. But yeah, it was boring. I thought some scenes were interesting, but overall, I saw myself just playing games on my phone more often than actually watching the movie itself. Easily in the top 5, maybe even in the top 3 portion of that top 5 worst MCU films of all time.
The only thing I will say good about this is the introduction of the Frost Giants. To me, that was interesting.
Yeah.
And I think we learn that Loki is actually adopted and he was born in from Frost Giants.
All right.
I think that is brought out in Thor: Dark World.
I thought that was in the first Thor, the Frost Giants, because I think in here, because I even have for the Funko Pops, there's the Dark Elves.
I think they were fighting. I think that they were worried about an invasion from the Frost Giants in the first one, but I believe the whole Loki was born a Frost Giant or a Frost Giant descendant is in the second one. I could be wrong, but there's not a lot good about Thor: Dark World. Honestly, I would put it in the very bottom 3 of MCU films. I was absolutely disappointed, and I wasn't the biggest Thor fan anyway. And this really, I was like, this is horrible, and I hated feeling that way after how many films already. Feeling like, oh god, I hate a Marvel movie.
Yeah, it was garbage. Makes Love and Thunder look like Shawshank Redemption.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
And then, in terms of Funko Pops, remolds of Thor and Loki, a little bit better, but they definitely do not live up to 2023 standards of detailed pops. And then the Dark Elf, which I can't even remember. I think all I remember is the main color is white. I can't even remember what the pop looks like.
There is an Odin pop, the Anthony Hopkins Odin pop. I couldn't tell you which series that came out with, and I don't think it was the first film, so it may have been this one.
It might have been, because I'm pretty sure, like I mentioned, there was only 2 pops for the first Thor film, so, or they might have been, I don't even remember, but.
Yeah, there's a Hemdoll as well. We actually have one in our garage sale last
night. Yeah.
Okay. Next movie is Captain America: The Winter Soldier, released April 4th, 2014, on a budget of $170 to $177 million, box office of $714.4 million, tomato ranking 90%, audience score 92%. I think out of every MCU film that's either like an origin story of a character like Iron Man or Captain America in this case, or let's say Avengers or Ant-Man and that, I think this is the best sequel. Like when you talk the first film and the second film, it is the best sequel out of any of like films that have multiple films.
I would give that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I actually like Winter Soldier more than I do Iron Man 2 and Dark World's garbage. And then you have even Avengers Age of Ultron.
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of Age of
Ultron. Sequel for the Avengers. So I would say you're correct. I bet you Winter Soldier is the best MCU sequel.
Yeah. And then Iron Man 2 would be the second one. Yeah. But yeah, Winter Soldier for sure. Yeah.
It's a great movie. Bucky Barnes goes completely badass.
That was something I was going to mention. Like the plot twist with Bucky, he never died, and that he is the Winter Soldier, which I mean, like if you were reading comic books and you're a hardcore fan of that, you probably knew that. But let's say you're a casual person like me and didn't really read so much comic books, and then you're watching this, it's like, oh, Bucky's not dead. And then especially seeing that some members of S.H.I.E.L.D. are actually a part of Hydra. That was a nice twist in the story also.
You're absolutely right. I actually loved, was it Crossbones? Yeah, Crossbones was
Crossbones in that film? I can't remember. I know Crossbones was in Civil War, which we'll get into, because I have him listed as one of the pops, but I didn't remember he was in.
I think we meet him as his non-masked form He's actually a Hydra agent.
Huh.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember that.
Anyway.
All right.
And then when it comes to the Funko Pops, they did quite a bit, I remember, for the original set. But the one that stands out to me is the remold of Winter Soldier for the Year of the Shield set they did last year. And I remember that pop selling out multiple times on Amazon, which is rare for Amazon to do with their reputation of very bad shipping. But when it comes to a great pop like that, it was leaps and bounds better than the original ones that they did. I remember were still pretty decent, but this one just blew the original one out.
You're right. I actually love the original unmasked Winter Soldier from that movie. That's a great pop. And the Year of the Shield release, we actually had those and sold them out multiple times. It was a very hot pop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, so the next film we're talking about is Guardians of the Galaxy, released August 1st, 2014, on a budget of $232.2 million, box office at $773.3 million, and both the tomato ranking and audience score was 92%. I thought this movie was fun. That's the one word to describe this. Is a fun movie, especially when you have the beginning with Quill fighting off the creatures while listening to his Walkman. It was pretty fun to watch that. Any scene with like Rocket and Groot. You can't hate on Drax. I mean, Drax is kind of a highlight of the movie. Like that might be a little bit biased for me since I'm a wrestling fan, so I know of Dave Bautista. Like, don't get me wrong, obviously there were serious moments. Like, obviously it wasn't fun seeing Quill's mother pass away at the beginning of the movie, but overall, like the moments involved in the movie after that, it was a fun movie overall. Like, this is one that I could probably rewatch again.
I agree as far as a fun scale. And the one thing that you can give Guardians is that no other MCU movie before it gave you a killer soundtrack.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Like they focused on that. It was like his way of connecting to Earth was his songs.
Mm.
And even the mixtape volume 1 was the steelbook cover for the Blu-ray. Like everything was about the music. And to me, that's what James Gunn brought to the MCU was fun and the music. Like there'd never been a Marvel movie where the only exception I could possibly make was that Iron Man bringing back AC/DC Back in Black.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And that was Iron Man 2 or 3?
I think
the soundtrack where he jumped out of the
plane.
I
think it's 3.
Is that 3?
It might be 3.
Yeah.
But it was, I mean, that's a great song, but if you take it as far as soundtrack and introducing great music, it was like a Tarantino film. Like where you had, not in the violence in that kind of way, but I mean as far as incorporating great songs, classic songs, and just making it a part of the story. And that's something that Tarantino doesn't get a lot of credit for.
Gotcha.
But if you listen to Pulp Fiction, you listen to Reservoir Dogs, the soundtracks are amazing. And those songs are incorporated into the film. They're not just into the background. Guardians of the Galaxy did that really well.
Yeah, I'm not a huge Guardians fan by any means, but I agree with you. It's just a fun movie.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't crazy love it, but I don't hate it. I just, I'm not a huge Guardians fan. And I didn't like the sequel.
No, the number 2.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet, but Guardians 2, that whole thing with Kurt Russell, who I love.
Yeah.
I hated that storyline. I was not a big fan of that. But the first one, especially, I love Michael Rooker.
Oh, yeah.
I thought
Rooker.
Everyone, Bradley Cooper voicing Rocket, amazing. Drax, Bautista, you find out he's funny, as well as just big and great as Drax. And I love Zoe Saldana as Gamora.
Bautista's an amazing actor.
Yeah.
Right there with The Rock in terms of like they got the sarcasm, the comedy, the action, everything. Like Stuber was so good. That other movie he did, I Spy, with the little kid. You ever seen that?
Yeah.
So good. He was so good in it. Anyway,
an underrated movie, Jen, for your followers, though, is Stuber for Dave Bautista. And
I heard nothing but good things. I still haven't even seen it.
It's really funny.
It's so funny. And Dave Bautista is so insanely funny in this.
And you get that with Drax, like his whole thing of like pointing out the obvious and making everyone laugh. Like I absolutely love that about the when Mantis could feel Quill's feelings for Gamora and Drax just,
oh yeah,
she shared your most embarrassing moment. And he's just laughing. Like, I absolutely love that. I'd say the one thing that pisses me off about Guardians is Vin Diesel. We talked about this multiple times.
We always do. We just feel like it doesn't make any sense why you even need him to voice Groot.
It's one line. It could be voiced by literally James Gunn could have done it himself. It could have been anyone.
It could be voiced by a computer.
It can voice it literally just I am Groot in different levels of tone and what have you. But it's not even his voice. They're altering the voice to make it a Groot voice. So why did we have to pay Vin Diesel to voice Groot? That is probably my biggest bugaboo. With
he would only record in Paris. So they had to fly him to Paris.
At a hotel.
Put him up in a hotel so he could do the I Am Groot thing. And they had to book the whole floor of rooms for a month.
Entourage.
Because he had to get prepared for the role.
He had to really study up.
Only kidding. I don't know.
We're making that part up.
We're making that up because I think Vin Diesel's a ridiculous
prima donna.
He's ridiculous. He's ridiculous. Anyways,
In terms to Funko Pops, I remember the first set. Oh, yeah, those did not age well, but there were still some cool pops there. But they did do later on the Marvel Collector's Core Quill, where he's actually holding the Power Stone. And it's a glow in the dark pop, and you see like kind of like the veiny effect from the effects of the stone. And I think they did that pop very well. That's one that stood out to me.
I will say one thing that Funko did right, and that was the original Groot pops. And a lot of them are grails, like Groot with mixtape. A lot of the Groot pops are people love Groot. So the Groot pops, they did well. I agree. The OG Guardians pops, even Gamora didn't look like Gamora.
All right, next film is Avengers Age of Ultron, released May 1st, 2015 on a budget of $444 to $495.2 million with the box office of $1.403 billion, tomato ranking 76%, audience score 82%. Not as good as the Avengers. I've watched this movie twice. And both times I think the same thing. There's something about it that just like was so off compared to, I don't know if it's like any of the scenes involved or just the whole like storyline. I mean, there were some cool scenes, like Sokovia was completely off it was in the sky at one point because of Ultron. And I mean, we did get the introduction of Scarlet Witch, I believe, and Quicksilver for this movie. So that leads to some cool things in the MCU. But overall, this is a movie I even hated having to rewatch this in preparation for the podcast. But it definitely, like, if I'm ranking all 4 of the Avengers films, including Infinity War, Endgame, and then obviously OG Avengers, this is at the bottom. It has to be.
100%.
Yeah, totally.
I'll give you 2 saving graces. One is James Spader is a very creepy, cool voice. I didn't like Ultron as a villain, but I love James Spader's voice for Ultron.
All right.
Number 2, and I agree with introducing Elizabeth Olsen even more so than Quicksilver. I think having Scarlet Witch is a huge part of the MCU. And also, lastly, it is that really cool moment that is being set up way in advance that they're all drinking and having a good time, and Thor's hammer's on the table and they all start taking turns trying to move it.
Oh, right.
And Thor's look on his face when he's the only one that notices it nudged a millimeter when Chris Evans, Captain America, touches the hammer. That to me is such a cool, like, looking back, rewatching the MCU. I was lucky enough, my son, after he turned a certain age, I was like, I want to introduce you to the MCU. And we watched them all in chronological order leading up to Spider-Man Far From Home, which we then saw in theaters. And now he's in. We watch every series, everything. So rewatching Age of Ultron, and I was not looking forward to it because I knew it's my least favorite Avengers film. That one scene and the look on Thor's face, and then what you find out in Endgame, I'm like, that is such a cool Easter egg that I never would have really paid much attention to on the first viewing of Ultron, but it absolutely sets up a beautiful scene from Endgame.
All right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And in terms of the Funko Pops, I know they did a nice set of Age of Ultron Pops. A couple to mention is the Iron Man Mark 43, where you actually have like the jet blasters from the hands and the feet as the base. They did a Hulk Buster for this set, which looked pretty cool. And then I have to shout out how ugly the Ultron Pop looks. I mean, already Ultron doesn't look that good, but then sometimes I find like Funko can make a pop that actually looks better than what you see on the screen. that was the complete opposite for here. So I think if there's any MCU character I could think of that needs a remold like ASAP, it's Ultron.
All right.
I'll go with that. I actually agree with that.
Yeah.
All right, next film is Ant-Man, released July 17th, 2015, on a budget of $130 to $169.3 million, with the box office of $519.3 million. Tomato ranking, 83%. Audience score 85%. Once again, like I mentioned with Guardians, it was a fun movie, had some cool scenes. However, like if you're ranking these movies, like this might be in the middle. Like it's not one of the worst, but it's not one of the best either.
I'll go out with that.
It's a
right
fun
in the
movie.
middle.
Like when I heard Paul Rudd was being cast as Ant-Man, I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. I thought he did a pretty good job.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing that Paul Rudd brings, and he actually got a little bit more because he was pretty soft, I would say, before. He did get a little jacked up, like at least leaned up and put a little bit of muscle on. But what Paul Rudd brings to the table is his insanely good comic and sarcastic timing.
Yeah.
That is something you can't teach. There are very few actors that can pull that off without even sweating, and that's Ryan Reynolds, Jason Bateman, and Paul Rudd's on that list. It is extremely difficult to be that good at being subtly sarcastic and bringing that sense of humor to a film, and Paul Rudd does that flawlessly. So I do love that. I also love, shout out to Canadian actress who plays Wasp, Evangelina Lilly from the Lost TV series.
I was gonna say Lost.
She is from Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta. So that's really cool to see her in the MCU. I did like Michael Douglas.
Yeah, so did I.
As well. He actually as Hank Pym.
Yeah.
I don't mind Ant-Man. I like Ant-Man.
I've watched it a couple times.
Good.
I've watched it a couple times.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the pops, I always mix up this movie with the Ant-Man and the Wasp sequel pops because they generally look the same. I can't remember like exactly what pops are in which set, but I remember there was an Ant-Man and there's a Yellow Jacket, and that I can definitely tell the difference from the different movies. But those are the two that Yeah.
The Yellow Jacket's a really cool one. It's like almost would you call it a pop ride where he's on the back of the giant Yellow Jacket.
Yeah, anyway. And I think they did a regular and a glow in the dark version, if I'm not mistaken. I remember mentioning at one point in like previous videos here on the channel.
They did a lot more pops for Ant-Man and Wasp, including a chase version of both Ant-Man and Wasp. And there's way more pop, and the giant Ant-Man Amazon exclusive 10-inch.
Yeah, was that from Civil War?
It might have been Civil War.
That's that one that was confusing me too, because I wasn't sure if it was Ant-Man the Wasp, or Civil War, which is actually surprisingly the next movie we're talking about, because it can go either or. For
scene at the airport when
he gets giant,
right? Yeah, so that would have been Civil War. Yeah. We have one upstairs.
All right, so next film, Captain America Civil War, May 6, 2016, on a budget of $250 million, box office of $1.153 billion, tomato ranking 90%, audience score 89%. Fantastic movie. I enjoyed watching this movie. Like, I remember watching it the first time and I'm like, okay, but then it's one of those things, it's like I forgot how great this movie was. I liked it both storyline wise and scene wise. I mean, you have the divide of like, okay, you got Captain America, you got Iron Man. There's the one side of, okay, do we go with the Sokovia Accord or do we not go with it? And then there's also the plot twist of finding out Bucky killed Tony's parents, which just ticked off Iron Man completely. And that was just insane to kind of see that whole thing. This movie is also known for the introduction of Spider-Man and Black Panther to the MCU, which both those characters end up having great movies later on. I would have to say easily it's in my top 5. I don't know exactly where it'd be placed in my top 5 favorite MCU movies, but it's somewhere in the top 5.
I absolutely love this movie, so don't get me wrong, but as I mentioned earlier, I don't believe this to be a Captain America movie. I think it's a massive ensemble film. It's right up there with an Endgame. They should have titled it separately. I don't think it should be Captain America Civil War. It could have been Avengers Civil War. I'm on board. And I shouldn't take the title, the poorly worded title, from the fact that it's a great movie. Like, it is really good. I love Civil War.
So this is the first Captain America that crossed over the billion mark, right?
Yes.
Yes, I believe, because I don't think Winter Soldier surpassed
Winter Soldier
billion.
didn't hit $1 billion.
So do you think it crossed over the billion mark because of the Iron Man and everything else? All the other characters helped drive it because it was more Avenger. People saw
it was
as
very
more,
Avengers.
Yeah, but maybe that ensemble cast is why it pushed it over that billion mark, because people are like, "Oh, I want to go see it because I love Iron Man and blah blah blah."
Well, if you look at every,
I agree with that.
If you look at the promotional for this film, everything was Team Cap versus Team Iron Man.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had all these other Avengers on each side. Mm-hmm. So really it should have been I think it should have just been called Avengers Civil War. Yeah. To me, I don't think that it's a Captain America movie when you're basically splitting the bill and the team between Cap and Iron Man. And that's how you're promoting the film.
But that's why it made so much money.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, true. Considering Avengers and Age of Ultron made $1 billion. So like if it was very Avengers-like, that would have drove it to $1 billion right there instead of just
that's
being
my
Captain
only
America.
Negative thing is the title. I don't consider it to be a Captain America movie. I consider this to be a Avengers movie.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that for sure. Yeah.
Also,
but it was great though.
It was fantastic. It's awesome. Fantastic. Yeah. It's in my top 10. Yeah. And I would also agree, it's fantastic introductions to Black Panther. And more importantly for me as a Spider-Man fan, Tom Holland and welcoming Spider-Man back into the MCU. That was huge. And including one of my favorite Funko Pops, which is Spider-Man holding Captain America's shield. Civil War had a ton of Funko. And that is one of my favorites.
I remember that pop.
And then right away, Spider-Man Homecoming. They used this movie to catapult that movie and getting Tom Holland in. I am so glad as a long time Spider-Man fan to have Spider-Man back in the MCU. That was a huge thing for me for Civil War.
Yeah, when it comes to the Funko Pops, that was a solid set of Pops, even if some of them were just, let's slap a common Iron Man and a common Captain America in a 2-pack, but it made sense for the promotional reason of the poster. You had the 2 different I think 3 different crossbones in this set, an unmasked, a masked, and then there was like a partially damaged masked version.
That's
which
cool,
looked really. And then I guess we got to acknowledge the upcoming set that's coming out for Amazon, where it's like that huge battle scene involving the 12 of them.
The airport.
Yeah. So that's going to be really awesome. And then I guess a scene I gotta mention, because I truly love this scene, is when anytime that it's involving Spider-Man with Iron Man, and he's like, "Hey, Mr. Stark, do you remember that old movie, Empire Strikes Back?" Where he just says like that old movie, and then like he's like, "Yeah, the kid's onto something," and they recreate Empire Strikes Back with the AT-AT and the cable to knock down Ant-Man. That was a wicked scene. Like overall, that was a fun scene. Definitely, like if you were to rank scenes in the MCU, it's got to be up there.
Yeah, I agree. I love Civil War.
All right, so the next movie is Doctor Strange, released November 4th, 2016 on a budget of 165 to 236.6 million, box office of $677.8 million, tomato ranking 89%, audience score 86%. Interesting storyline, something very different from what we would normally see up until this point. Had some cool scenes, especially the hospital scene when he's basically dying on the bed, and you have kind of like the, I guess, I don't want to call it spirit, but maybe more of the soul version of their fighting, and you see like the lights flickering as Christine's doing the operation. She's like, what the is going on here? So like it was a pretty cool movie. I think it is a movie I might rewatch, but not as often as like Avengers and Captain America Civil War, some of my top 5 and top 10 films.
Yeah, I agree. I actually was really impressed with Benedict Cumberbatch because I'd only known him from dramas. I know a lot of people loved him in Sherlock, and I think was he Doctor Who at one point? I might take a lot of heat for that. I think he was. But I'd only seen him in like, what's the one where he invents the code machine that will break the German code for Enigma. Like he's an amazing actor. So I was like, okay, this will be very interesting. And he pulls off cocky and intelligent like nobody else. But then there's a secret bit of sarcasm as well in his performance. And then we get to meet Wong.
I like Wong.
I love Wong.
I'm a big Wong fan. I am a Wong fan. Doctor Strange to me it's a good movie.
Yeah.
But to me, it's just a movie in the MCU, you know? Like I've watched it once, I'll never watch it again, probably.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't find it as enjoyable. If I'm sitting there, like you said, if I'm gonna
Something
watch
fun.
if I'm putting something on and I'm just like, what do I want to watch? And I've only got Avengers to watch, I'm probably gonna put on Civil War, or I'm gonna put on the original Iron Man, or probably Endgame, you know, like or Homecoming, you know.
Oh, I love Homecoming.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like Doctor Strange, good movie. I watched it once, that's good enough for me. And
I got to see it twice, once rewatching the MCU, introducing my son to the MCU. But I probably wouldn't just throw on Doctor Strange just because.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They made a huge set of pops for this movie also, but for some reason that first OG Doctor Strange from 2016 San Diego Comic-Con just stands out the most out of them, where he's got like the circle gimmick. I don't even know the proper name for it, going on for it, but that one stands out. I know they did the villain too, and he looked cool with like the way they pulled off the eyes, but just that OG Doctor Strange for that set that like kind of kicked off before even knowing about anything about the movie was a really cool pop.
Yeah, I agree.
And now the final film of this first part of the MCU podcast. It's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, May 5th, 2017, on a budget of $200 million, box office of $863.8 million, tomato ranking 85%, audience score 87%. I kind of do agree with the rankings of both of them there, because I believe when we were talking about Guardians 1, I was somewhere in the 90s, and then this one's much lower, which I do agree. It is fun like the first movie, but I felt what maybe not like this is how much comedy was like shoved down our throats to the point where it's like, okay, we get it, it's funny, but then it's just too much. Like, especially like Dave Bautista had some cool moments. And I think actually a moment you talked about earlier with Guardians was in this movie and not the first one, which was the Mantis scene. So like there's the moments where like Bautista has like that forced laugh and it's like, ha ha, she knows that you like, or whatever he said there. But like I felt there was like too much of that. Like I can get like the first couple of times that's funny, but when there's too much and it was just shoved down our throats way too much with like the amount of comedy, like I felt like it took away of what made the first movie special.
I'll go out with that. I felt that way about, we're nowhere near that yet, but I felt that way about Love and Thunder, where Ragnarok was so funny and it was perfect, and all the comedy had a place and it wasn't forced, where it was over forced in Love and Thunder, and that bothered me. Never thought that about Guardians 2 before you mentioned that, and now that I think about it, I think you're absolutely right. And I just think the way that the movie ended, I wasn't a huge fan of Guardians 2 ending like that, and the whole thing with Kurt Russell. I loved Kurt Russell as his dad, but then he wanted to destroy everything. I just honestly, I don't even remember, and I don't think I'll ever rewatch it.
Yeah, like I said, I've watched it once and I didn't like it the first time. So I don't know.
The first Guardians is way better.
I was completely uninterested. Actually, I would say I was almost bored in this movie.
They did try to get things a little cutesy by having the baby Groot in this one as opposed to normal Groot in the first, and that actually really took off, and they did well merchandising wise and Funko Pop wise with baby Groot.
Pre-baby Yoda and Grogu is Groot for this movie. Yeah, the mixtape, there was like probably with some sort of blaster and some sort of object. This set was very, I guess, overwhelmed with a lot of Groot. But yeah, when it comes to, I mentioned about how the original set just did not look that great, especially looking at Star-Lord. Now you can look at Guardians 2 Star-Lord and it's like, that looks like Chris Pratt. Like the way they did everything involved with the facial hair. It's just like, you can take it out of box and it's like, yeah, that's Chris Pratt right there. Unlike the first one, it's like, no. But one pop that stood out to me that I wrote down is the Stan Lee cameo pop that is in the space suit. I can't remember which convention. I think it was New York Comic-Con, but I don't remember the year because I don't think it came out. Yeah, I know it was New York. I can't remember the year though.
I think it was released. 2018 New York Comic-Con. I remember the sticker and the pop. It's a great pop.
Yeah.
And I guess before we end off this first part of the pod, I guess because we are on Guardians 2, I believe the movie released after Quantum Mania is going to be Guardians Volume 3. So I want to know your thoughts. Do you think it's going to be better than the second movie, not knowing anything yet? It seems like I've noticed a trend with MCU that their third movie is fantastic for a trilogy. We've seen it with No Way Home, which we'll get into in part 2, and especially Thor Ragnarok that we'll get into in part 2.
I'll agree. From what I
Yeah,
saw in the
yeah.
trailer, this movie looks way better than number 2.
Yeah.
So I'm excited. Apparently, also, you can tell from the trailer, and I don't know how they're going to work this in, that Gamora is not dead. Whether it's a time jump, whether she did not die in Endgame or Infinity War. It was something with Thanos, and because he had to sacrifice her to get the Soul Stone.
Right.
So for whatever reason, Gamora is in the trailers. So I'm curious to see how they do it.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I saw so far, sneak peeks, this looks to be probably way better than Guardians 2.
Yeah, Guardians 2 was crap. So I think it's going to be better.
There's only one way to go.
One way to go.
Go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I think MCU too. They know when they make a crap movie and they redeem themselves.
That's true.
You know? So that's my opinion. So yeah.
Alrighty, so that's going to be the end of this part of the MCU movie podcast. If you've enjoyed what you listened to so far, don't forget to smash the like button, comment in the comment section below, press the subscribe button, and don't forget to hit the notification bell of when future content like part 2 of this podcast gets released. But thank you anyways for listening to this edition of a Funko podcast, and we'll see you guys next week on part 2 of the podcast, where we kick off with Spider-Man Homecoming. 1, 2, 3, I'm out of here.